And Greg, I want to come to you about this as we're talking about the Penn State defensive coordinator search. News broke over the weekend, some reporting out there about the latest on who's going to be the next defensive coordinator. Greg, can you take us through the timeline of this particular story?
Tom Allen was a name that made sense, one of many. Sean, I'll be curious to hear your take on this. But obviously, when James Franklin joked on Friday of last week that he wishes that this thing got done yesterday, he wasn't just talking about the fact that he was on the road recruiting his own roster and looking for a second coordinator of the offseason. But, there's a lot of stuff you have to get rolling on once that guy gets into town. And, oh, by the way, you're getting ready to leave for a bowl game. So there's no question they'll be happy to get this wrapped up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. But then you look at the offensive coordinator search, and he was trying to win 2 games at the end of the season. So it's like pick your poison here. Like, he can do that on the road. He can stop by and see people. A lot of this stuff is done with Zoom anyway these days. Mm-hmm. I think we've figured out that, taking the private jet to wherever Tom Allen is at this point is probably a bit of a waste of fuel. Like, when you can talk to that guy and you still want to feel him out, you still want to know this guy a little bit, but they've had Big Ten coaches meetings. He's been around him. So this is a hire, or an expected hire that really fits a lot of what he sort of outlined last week. Mm-hmm. So not a terribly surprising name. I know Nate's going to hate that I say that, but like, he was he fits the bill of what James Franklin was most successful with last time around, and finding a head coach that no longer had a job with a defensive reputation that's got, that has been successful at stops along the way, even if his head coaching tenure did not end perfectly, or well in this case. So I've always admired Tom Allen as a coach. I think he is done when he's got the, or when he's had the, talent at his disposal, and that's not always an easy thing to do at Indiana. He has developed some guys and made some pretty good players out of it. But I'm interested to see what he could do with this level of athlete without the pressure of running everything, because I think that's an underrated aspect of this. When Manny did not have to run the entire program, he's good, man. He was really good. And
and a
James
defensive
Franklin,
line.
I guess. Yeah, right. And James Franklin hopes that he can replicate that success. It's very interesting to me. Like, it was a role that I compared to when Moorhead left, and they wanted to keep the framework of the offense intact, but bring in a different guy, see how that goes. And it just so happened that Ricky Ronnie was that guy. Poor Ricky, by the way. I don't even want to get Greg. I'm not going to get
me. Poor me. Yeah.
But anyway, similar framework. 4-2-5-ish, 4-3 with the Sam, and attacking. And that's really the parameters of what James Franklin was looking for. And I think I'm not going to say it's seamless, but I think he found as close to that as he's going to find on this open market.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. The part about Tom Allen's defense, somebody asked me this a couple weeks ago, is he a fit? And I initially said no, because some of the stuff he does on the back end is pretty aggressive. Manny Diaz, aggression, a couple of different ways of getting to the same place of being aggressive with your defense. And James Franklin likes to keep a lid on explosive plays. Well, some of the stuff that Tom Allen does opens you up to some big plays. And that was, to me, the biggest question about how that would translate to Penn State. But obviously, if James Franklin has reportedly we're heading that way, that's something that he's fine with.
Yeah, and I think the question there is how much of that is out of necessity at Indiana versus what you have here. I mean, you can get home with, you maybe need an extra guy to put pressure on at Indiana, whereas Penn State, 4 or 5 guys have been pretty successful with that. So I'm just very intrigued to see how this personnel goes. Somebody just made a point in the chat that he knows Ohio State and Michigan. He's played Ohio State and Michigan the same amount of times as Penn State has over the last however many years. And, so he's got the brain trust in there as well. So interested to see how this works. Nothing is guaranteed here, but I mean, I hate to say this, but it seems safer than the leap that James made to hire Manny. Because I know there's a lot of hindsight involved in this thing with Manny being fantastic, but when you brought in Manny, you weren't sure what to expect. And those guys took to it pretty quickly. And I'm curious how this works out in the spring.
Yeah, he laid the groundwork of taking from Brent. I called it the Pry Diaz spectrum of aggressiveness, where Pry maybe was on one side of not necessarily aggressive, playing kind of standard football, and then Manny Diaz all the way on the other side. Tom Allen fits somewhere in the middle, but Beach Wine Guy says this in the chat, and I'm interested because you just echoed some of this, Fitz. Feels like a comfortable hire, not flashy or splash like Diaz, should be able to be successful maintaining a strong defense. Is it just because Tom Allen is in the Big Ten for the last 8 years that he doesn't feel like a splashy, sexy hire? Manny Diaz was a fired head coach. Like, I know that he had a name in college football, but Tom Allen has been a head coach for 8 years in one of the most competitive divisions in football. So is it just the unfamiliarity of coming from a different conference, or is it truly that Tom Allen is a more safe hire than Manny Diaz, like, in that sense?
That's tough because you have this little like chart there where you're looking at coaches, and the peak would be as a head coach. So you get fired as a head coach, you're seemingly headed down the mountain on the other side. So I think
Right.
that's really where you go with that. And you look at some of the names that were associated with the job. Jeff Collins is one of those guys that popped up. Like, there's not too many guys that are like right at the precipice of being there. And Manny was the same way. Like, Manny, before he got the Miami job, or before he got the Temple job, and then he got the Miami job, was,
Right.
a guy that was elevating for a reason. And, you're going to have to recapture some of that stuff to get where Tom was when he, almost hit the peak there of being a head coach. I'm not saying that's the peak of his career, but like, that's what he's going to be remembered as, former Indiana head coach. So
For sure.
we'll see what happens. There's some rehab along the way here in terms of like what he has to do to sort of recapture some of the magic that he's had at times. And boy, Indiana's really tough, man. Like, and I've been talking to my guy, Zach Osterman at the Indy Star all week about this. He's just like, hey, you're not going to be able to sustain success at Indiana. We'll see how Cignetti does. But it's a really tough situation to recruit that area away from the Notre Dames and away from the Big Ten schools that are out there as well. Try and hit on some guys in Florida. Tom Allen's got some connections down south. So it would be a situation where you're trying to do some of the same things that you do at Penn State, trying to figure out the guys in Florida that are not going to Florida State, Miami, but can still like be dudes, like be really, really good players. Find the guys in Alabama that are not going to go to Alabama or Auburn, but Dakari Nelson, can he be a player here? Like that is the situation that you're trying to figure out how you can make the most of those relationships down south. And I'm not saying anything's going to change with the way that they've done things, but it'd be interesting to see a new face in that room and what that does for some.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. And normally I don't try to single out people in this way, but I hope this is fun for everybody. Jeff has had some all-time bad takes here in the chat. Like, I'm now on 4 totally bad takes that he's had in the chat. And I just want to say, like, I think he means Corum walked right in the end zone with no one around him. Manny was no save you guys made him out to be. I just, Manny Diaz was a good defensive coordinator. He was a very, very good defensive coordinator. Everyone agrees on that. So I just, like, the internet needs to take a step back for a second for us. Greg, Anthony Poindexter, a lot of fans, I would say some of the other parts of this is not Dex. Now the concern is maybe he's looking for his own defensive coordinator job. How do you fit all of that into this conversation of retaining the current staff and developing and putting all of this together?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if you watch the videos from Friday's news conference, I didn't get the sense, T. Frank and Sean, that Anthony Poindexter, it was, he was asked if he wanted to be the next guy, and he kind of smiled and said, Coach Franklin and I have had some conversations, and they left it at that. And, I mean, that's the way these things work. I thought James Franklin's, one of his comments was telling, was that basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but sometimes guys are ready. The moment is right when the right opportunity comes, and that may not always be the case the next time around. Not speaking specifically, wow, that was tough, Anthony Poindexter, but just this idea that, I mean, let's take the Andy Koltanecki, Ty Howe example. Andy Koltanecki interviewed for Ty Howe's job, and he was not the right guy to be Penn State's tight ends coach at that moment. And now, a few years later, he's the right guy to be the Penn State offensive coordinator. So I don't have this feeling, and I'll see what you think, Shoaib. I don't have this feeling that, Anthony Poindexter packed up all his stuff as soon as the reports came out over the weekend and stormed out of the Lash building. So we'll see how it all plays out. But just real quick on the Tom Allen perception front, I think part of it is that Penn State was 6-1 against him during his time at Indiana. I think some folks are probably unfairly looking at that and saying, well, we're taking the guy that could not beat Penn State, could sometimes not stop Penn State, and making him the defensive coordinator. I think if he was at I don't know, a school that Penn State played maybe once in the West. Joe Rossi's name was bounced around. Let's use him as an example for Minnesota. He might be looked at differently, even though he might not be as good of a fit as Tom Allen is. So, yeah, there's some, I think you said, well, Sean, there's some rehab there, some perception things that from the outside they're going to have to deal with. But I don't know if you want to sit here and knock James Franklin for any part of his head coaching tenure and the things that he's done. You're more than welcome to do so, but it's really hard to put at the top of the list of things to knock him for picking the right defensive coordinator. Right. I mean, the success is there dating back to Vanderbilt. So if you want to knock this, that, and the other thing, I get it. But I think in this instance, you have to look at the track record and say that he has been very good and has a tremendous hit rate when it comes to not just hiring coaches, because he's been pretty good at that in general, but specifically defensive coordinators.
Yeah, Fitz, this is the other thing that I was thinking about, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Just James Franklin talking about having the chops to call the defense, a proven track record of calling a defense, but also just on a secondary level, Manny Diaz left an impact on Penn State, where James Franklin is saying, like, we've played really good defense. Manny Diaz took it to another level. So again, my concern always was hire Anthony Poindexter, and everyone goes, hey, just do what Manny did. And like, that's really hard. Tom Allen coming in after the guy. That was another thing James Franklin brought up on Saturday. Do you think that that's part of the fit here too, is a guy who is proven, comfortable in his own skin, and probably doesn't have the same, there's less concern over that thing generally than if you are elevating Anthony Poindexter and saying, okay, now it's your turn to steer this ship and you were in this system, so you need to do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much tape that he can watch about Penn State's defense to figure out what he has, because so much of it is personnel. I mean, you look at the athletes that they have, especially in that back seven. The ability to do that is really, really special. Like, you're getting KJ Winston for another year. You're getting Jalen Reed and Zakee Wheatley back there. It just makes you feel a little bit safer. So going back to what you said earlier about some of the stuff that left them open at Indiana, maybe you don't have to do that as much. And with that, it's going to make you look like a better coordinator at least. So I'm very, very encouraged to see that. And he's been a guy that has done with I don't want to say he's done a lot with a little, because Indiana's success it's scattered. Like, it can have that really good year in 2020, but what does that mean with COVID? I don't know. I'm not here to talk about Indiana, but I am here to talk about how hard it is to coach at Indiana and sustain success at Indiana. And he was able to at least keep his job for a long time, which does not happen all that much for a program these days that has the record that they had. So it'll be very interesting to see how he adapts. Like, there's a lot to like out there. There's a lot to sort of build around those defensive ends that are coming back next year. Even when you lose Chop, when you lose Adisa, you still have Denai Dennis Sutton, Vanover, Fisher, and Lyon. So this is a situation where you're kind of well stocked on the defensive side of the ball, so you're feeling pretty decent about how he can make it work. And it's about the voice in the room too. It's about understanding what you bring to the table, understanding your limitations, maybe as a play caller, and then sort of feeling that out in the spring, taking those things that you would have done against or as Indiana and adapting them to the personnel that you have. Like I said, this defense can make a lot of people look really good.